Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. My name is Brian Francis, your invisible voice inside your head, and we are here today playing Squirrel Simulator. I bet you thought you were here to play another game, but nope. It's all about squirrels. Just kidding. It's World to the West. And I'm joined here in the bottom left-hand corner by two wonderful people. Alyssa, could you say hi?
Hi, I'm Alyssa, also a contributing editor at Gamasutra.
And I'm also joined by Peter, who is the lead designer at World to the West. Peter, I forgot to ask before the stream started, but do you have a webcam?
Oh no, I could put one up, but I haven't gotten one active currently, unfortunately. Actually, perhaps give me 2 seconds.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, Peter runs off to thankfully accommodate my forgetting to ask him about a webcam beforehand. Just so you know, World to the West comes via Rain Games, which is a developer in Norway, who I first personally discovered when I checked out their game, Teslagrad, which launched on... that was previously on Steam, PS4, Wii U, and other platforms. And, ooh, this guy chomps. Can I eat the squirrel?
Oh, yes.
Oh no!
I ate the squirrel!
You monster.
I'm a monster. I'm just going to send this guy really... I'm going to eat this bug. Can't eat the bug.
It's too small.
Yeah.
It's not on the food chain for you.
I'm going to send this guy really far away. But yeah, so this is the follow-up game set in the same world as Teslagrad, but it is instead of being a side-scrolling kind of Metroid-style game, it is a top-down adventure game that feels more like Zelda, Link to the Past, kind of the game, what I would know as the Game Boy Zeldas, you might know as the SNES Zeldas, and we're here talking with Peter about the development of the game.
Yeah.
Peter, just to get things started, could you sort of, for Gamasutra viewers who may not know much about you guys, could you introduce, introduce Rain Games, how you got started, and how you got started, what made you want to make World to the West?
All right, so that's a long story, possibly. We got started back in 2010, and as you said, the first game that people probably know from us is Teslagrad. That was originally released on PC in the very end of 2013 as our first title, and we already knew before we started to make that game that we wanted to make more games in sort of a world where we could develop the story over time and sort of build out the universe. And also, we knew that we didn't want to make direct sequels, so we knew that we weren't going to do a Teslagrad 2 or anything like that, because game ideas sort of get watered down a bit, at least usually. We knew that kind of thing. But we really wanted to keep the narrative, the story, and all those things. By the way, you can ride it. The crew. We wanted to keep the narrative, the story, and those kind of those things around, because we know that's an investment for people to get into a world. Also, we had a lot of more stories that we wanted to tell.
Yeah.
So we knew that, and we had to decide on which game we wanted to do. And what we do here at the office is that everyone once in a while pitches in their game ideas, and they get just bounded between each other, and we try to figure out which ones we like the best and which ones everyone wants to add to, so that an idea sort of grows a bit over time. And it's become now the norm that the one that has sort of accumulated the most mass at the time where we have to pick a new game project will be the next one we do. And for this one, it was World to the West, and it is a lot of us have contributed like little pieces to the core idea. What I mostly, of course, since I'm you said lead designer, that's lead game designer, right? So I had the good ideas for sort of the game design and elements of the title, and Ollie already had like a very strong visual aesthetic that he wanted to do for this, that we knew that we could produce somewhat efficiently to get the game done. And yeah, so when Teslagrad was done and we started to do all the ports, which was a gradual thing for Teslagrad, we also already just very early on created a design document and created pictures of the game that looked very much like what the game does today.
Nice. What made you guys go from a 2D, very difficult puzzle-driven game to sort of this more, like, it's slower, a little bit more, like, thinky kind of puzzles with World of the West?
Actually, so you should probably mention that Teslagrad can be a bit hard. And it sort of broke my heart to have several people tell me that they loved the title, loved the art, they loved the story. They actually couldn't, despite themselves, manage to actually finish it. And there have been a few complaints about some parts of the game spiking a bit in difficulty and stuff, and some people like that. But other people, and also people who really love the title, couldn't. And one of the advantages of this sort of title, right, is that there is sort of a built-in natural difficulty adjustment, in the sense that if you can't progress because you can't beat the boss or something like that, you can usually just look around in the world a little bit more, try and find a few health upgrades, those kind of things, and just use time and effort to become stronger, and face it and have an easier time at it. It doesn't mean that skill isn't rewarded, because you would get past there more easily if you were able to beat it straight on. But yeah. That is one of the reasons why this sort of gameplay fit the title a bit better. It's also more of a story-driven title. Is the Tastragard story I wrote when we wrote that, it was we had to put a lot of work into making it silent and those kind of things. But although I'm very happy with the story in Tastragard, how it's presented without words, it still didn't take up a lot of game time. In that sense, but in this title, sort of the characters and their interactions is a larger part of what also takes up in the time in the game. So it also adds to sort of the pacing of it. I guess that any sort of action adventure title has that going for it. Although of course we didn't want to slow things down too much, so we have tried to condense everything into always either presenting a character or driving the plot, or at least not taking up someone's time with the details about something that they don't care about. So it's compressed story-wise, but I guess Tastragard was ultra compressed in that department. So
how much work?
Yeah, it's slower.
Or how much work was it to switch from having no dialogue to having dialogue that you'd have to localize for all these regions?
It's not a lot of work to localize, just costs money really, because you can't just work harder and then translate into languages you don't know. So it's mostly just a funding issue. We've been working with Sodesco for the physical retail copies, and they have helped us with some of the languages as well for regions that we probably wouldn't have done because of the expense usually. We did sort of the big five usual translations that you have to have for consoles anyway, which are English, French, Spanish, German, and Italian. In addition to that, we also did Norwegian, because that was quite simple for us, and we had a deal with the Norwegian Film Institute to do that. And then they added another 5 languages on top of that. So a little bit of at least European diversity in the lingual department in this title. And Chinese.
Cool. Alyssa, you were talking before about no, that's not good. Before you and I were talking before about the stream, you had some questions kind of about working on this game that you had specifically. Can you jump in with those?
Oh yeah, no, I was going to ask, because you have 4 main characters you can play as throughout this, right? That you swap between. How is the process of designing like those puzzles to be like have multiple solutions or be like adaptable to each character as you go through them?
That was actually a big that we knew right from the start was going to be a big challenge, because I had to build every level for every one of the 4 characters. They have to be fun to play with all 4 of them. There has to be something to do for each one of them in each level as well. We also had to be very careful about gatekeeping, because we didn't want to lead characters into areas where they didn't have any tasks yet, or those kind of things, and we didn't want the wrong character to progress too early in the story, especially like in the beginning of the game now. The story progresses somewhat linearly. You can, for example, decide to do the Knaus bit now before you do the Terry bit, but still there is a semi-linearity to it. While at the middle point of the game, it opens up completely, and you get to explore everything in sequence and pace that you like. But for the story part of the game, we have to watch out a lot for the sort of the level design for the different characters in that regard. And we also have, because you get permanent like upgrades of abilities as well. So that is a more common design feature that you have to remember to design the level so that it's fun even when the characters become stronger or has more abilities. But yeah. So each level we had to sort of try and compress in as much gameplay as possible for the different characters and to make as many different paths and experiences for each one. We sort of had a different game genre in mind for each character. So for Knaus, you have to have an experience that is the mining kid, the other kid that was left outside right now. For those of you who don't know, for him, we had to sort of build a stealth experience. There had to be a little tension. There had to be some monsters that could threaten him. And there had to be some good opportunities to avoid them and to be clever. For this character, there has to be some monsters that you can play with or work with. And some different opportunities and solutions. And so the monsters that are on different levels have to be available, and also we have to watch out so that you can't kill all the monsters that you need in order to solve a puzzle. But that is sort of more of a thought experiment or puzzle experiment. For Clonington, which you haven't unlocked yet, but will be with you soon, it's very much of a brawling game. So we had to always have a lot of enemies that you could fight and combat that you could do. So every level had to have those kind of challenges as well. He's very bad at avoiding a fight, but he's good at winning one. So you'll get to experience that later. And for Lumina, it's a lot about sort of decisive action, both in our teleportations, which can be a very effective way to move across the map, and in her attacks. So that's also had to do with enemy spacings, giving experienced players sort of a rhythm to how they pass through enemies and pass through the level, and also the spacings of different platforms, ideally so that she can move a little bit before blinking the next time and making sort of a natural, speedy way of moving, which is more comfortable with her than... We can drop the coin, by the way, if you'd like to.
Oh, that is a good point. I should...
Did you see the other one? The one on the shelf above you?
Oh, this... Right, the one that's up there, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I should work on getting that one. Oh, that's how I get that one. Okay.
So did that sort of answer your question? It was a lot of work, and we sort of had to play a lot with each character in each area to sort of make sure that there was something for every one of them. Over and over and over again. That's one of the things we kept adding and adding and adding all the way through developing the game.
Because the character switches, they aren't like instantaneous. So you can't just like switch your character wherever you are. You have to go back to these totem poles to do it too.
Yes.
So that was probably something to kind of control like the puzzle and control like where characters are at to help with that.
This is correct. I mean, if you could switch characters on the spot, it would be effectively an inventory system, right? I mean, not aesthetically, but effectively. And then also you could end up with characters in spaces where they weren't meant to be, where there is no gameplay for them. And the entire game would have to be designed very differently. We also like to make different puzzles for different characters to progress to the same area, and sort of also experiencing the area twice. For example, if you have to sneak past some scary monsters with Knaus, then you come back with Clonington and you pummel everybody. Or you see a good opportunity to mind control some powerful beast with Terry later on when you come back. It can be great fun. And the point isn't to feel sort of repetition. The point is to have a different experience in a known environment and sort of see how the environment is different for this character.
They're very layered on top of each other to kind of add that depth to it, it seems like.
Yep.
Oh.
Let's see.
Trying to watch where you're jumping here.
Nope.
Straight in the wall.
Oh, and another one pops out.
Yes. So, of course, in this particular instance, right, you need that particular flail monk to solve a puzzle. So we have a spawn point in the tunnels. So if you manage to murder it, you will always have a new one. I'm predicting that it's going to die. Hold on.
Wait up there.
This is also behavior, right? You see, you managed to put it on a place where you couldn't reach it,
Mm-hmm.
but it managed to get back into circulation.
Yeah. How do you I guess how do you keep track of I mean, I guess the answer every time I answer this question of a developer, the answer is always playtesting, but how do you figure out those little moments where a puzzle might break, I guess?
First, for foremost, I imagine all the ways I could obviously break the puzzle myself,
Mm-hmm.
and players will always find a few other ways, more ways to break it. I mean, if you really want to, if you really make an effort, you can, of course, lose that squirrel in some interesting place where it can't return within the boundaries of the game rules.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to work at it. You have to deliberately do this. And that is at that point okay, especially since there are more squirrels on level. You just have to walk a little bit as punishment for being obstinate.
Ollie Rudy says just like real pets. I presume that's Ollie, who is the game's art director, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So shout out to Ollie in the chat, and just a general reminder that for anyone in the chat, you can ask your questions of Peter, and we will ask him. So I guess we can switch over to questions about running this team. So how did Rain Games come together, and sort of what? I guess my next question is, what's it like being an indie developer in Norway right now?
All right, so back in 2010, it had just become feasible to make a game studio in Norway at all. They only really, the old guard consisted of 2 companies that had done this before it was possible, I would say. And those, one of them you probably know about, which is Funcom.
Mm-hmm.
And they had like Age of Conan and those kind of games, and they managed to somehow miraculously do stuff before anyone else could. And the other one was a company who made another MMO called Darkfall, which you might have heard of, but perhaps not. It's more of a sort of realistic combat, very harsh consequences sort of MMO. Either way, those were the entire old guard, and because the problem is in Norway there is no funding from private people for games, or there's no investment will. And it's very simply to do with the fact that Norway has never had an end to an infinite real estate bubble. That's one reason. The other one is oil, which has always been a safe investment, and the third one is fish. And with three things like that, there's no real reason for investors to get creative in any other industry at all. But the Norwegian film industry had started to give out a relatively modest grant. But the modest grant is all you need to get something started, really. So all at the same time, several studios started to come together. Now, for my part, I had been, even before this, creating a group where I gathered up a bunch of creative people to do projects that were larger than any one of them could do on their own. I've always been sort of a person who works in the sort of organizations, volunteer organizations of different kinds. I've been active in something called Hyperion, which is sort of a national level structure above all sort of nerdy organizations like paintball clubs or LAN parties or anything like that, role-playing conventions or comic conventions and those kind of things. And Hyperion's job was to sort of divvy out some state funding and to also organize all these youth organizations together in some sense and be a common voice. So I created my own organization, and we did that sort of collaborative work thing. And in that group, we had a lot of people doing like board games or role-playing games, or even comics, and there were some people who wanted to do computer games. Computer games had always been an enormous passion of mine. I'd always thought that they were way beyond reach, though, to manage to put together a game studio. And I had gotten a few people on board, some of them who are in Rain today. So that's the start of the company. And also 2 other people with a different game project who met each other to both sort of being part of that environment. And but we had a discussion with them for a long time whether we were going to be one company or two companies. But in the end, they sort of wanted to do their own thing. So we each became one of the 2 game studios in Bergen. And you know of them also probably, because those are Deephead Studio with Oldboy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We had Oldboy on a while back. The game's really cool.
Yes. Definitely. So we came out of sort of the same basic background, you can say. And yeah, later on, there was already one game studio that started right before us, and later on a few more game studios came to here in Bergen. So, and Rain itself, of course, has been through many phases since that point. We've got a lot of extra new and talented people on board, and sadly, we've lost a lot of the people we originally had, because when you start to get serious, it's actually a big experience to see who can manage to sort of follow a progress when people become more experienced, and who can't really do that, because it's one thing to have sort of a hobby. It's a very different thing to have to create something that people want. And we always gave people a chance, but it also had to work out in the end.
I hate to ask for help, but I think I trapped my little squirrel over there.
You did, but you can pick the squirrel from downstairs.
Oh, good point. I need to go find that squirrel.
There's a squirrel out here. Oops. You managed to mess with earlier. So that is part of it. By the time that we released Tesla, actually a little while before, the Rain team had sort of settled pretty much. And it had been through its most turbulent part of its start, I guess. We had gotten a somewhat proper office, and everything was sort of settling in a little bit more. And there's been a really interesting gaming community, both in Norway in general, which has seen a lot of new game studios over the last couple of years, and in Bergen especially as well. We also have another game studio here, which you might have heard of, which is the other one used the mouse hole when you were trying to access it.
Oh God.
That was why you couldn't enter. Did you see that the other Flaming just came out right when you wanted to go in?
Yeah, I saw that.
So they can only pass one at a time.
Yeah.
Anyway, another studio you might have heard of is 30-bit, which is also here in town. They have a mobile game that's done pretty well called Fun Run.
I guess the follow-up question is there any particular challenge? I mean, now it seems like there's more funding for games, but is there any other challenge trying to be an independent developer out there?
Yeah, definitely. It's still funding is still a big issue. You have to make most of your money back on the game, of course, and you still everything in game development here is about the same as everywhere else. It's just that now you can get like a few $10,000 to get something started and start, I guess, if you're very lucky. And that even that is starting to become harder these days. So for the most part, I guess it's pretty much the same as other places. It's also that we are a bit outside the scene of even Europe, because Norway is a bit isolated up here. I mean, it's a good long flight to any other European capital that you know of. So we're a bit less part of the general community of Europe, or the gaming community in general. We have to go to a big convention in order to meet others usually. And that can be challenging, especially since word of mouth in the community can often be important. And like if you were in San Francisco or something like that, you might more easily get in touch with others.
I guess is there anything that's different about the European the European player? Like, have you noticed any major differences in the people who play your games depending on what country they come from, and are players in? Oh geez, I did this to myself. Go over here. Don't bother me, squirrel. Like, is there any big difference in what people particularly enjoy when it comes to your games, and does that influence how you design your games?
I can have some examples to that. So for this title, I find it very interesting because I find it culturally dependent which one of the 4 characters you like most. And I'm going to ask you, I sort of want to reveal that at the end because I want you to see all the 4 characters and I want you to pick one, and I'll see whether you fall into my my American slot. But yeah, and we also, with this release of this game, we've seen a surprising number of sales from China. Like no, the game hasn't been out for very long, so as you pointed out, it's still a modest. It's just 2,000 units on Steam still.
Mm-hmm.
We're also selling it on consoles, which is a different story. But out of those 2,000 Steam units, almost half were China.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't expect that. But they really like sort of happy, colorful games. And of course, there's also a European or American audience for that. But there are parts of the European or American audience who very categorically don't play games like this.
Mm-hmm. Nicholas Wagner wants to know if Americans have a harder time solving the puzzles.
No, I don't think so. I think that is pretty much the same. But I think that they occasionally enjoy them less, and that they have a little bit more emphasis on combat.
Mm-hmm. My follow-up question about... Actually, Alyssa, do you have any questions about different players first before I dive into my nerdy interests?
No, I'm excited for your nerdy interest right now.
My nerdy interests are... I noticed that when I was playing Teslagrad, and I think I was sort of catching on to what you were thinking about with the nationalities of the different characters. I noticed that these games sort of feel like almost like European fairy tales. Like Teslagrad felt like a fairy tale version of some like historical, like it felt almost like an Eastern European country or a country
Oh yes.
taking over another country, but told from the point of view of a kid, or as though it was a story being told to a kid. Do you sort of get to draw from I don't know if it's Norwegian folklore or European history, like how do you sort of draw on that culture to make a game like this?
Well, that's a big area. So I love lots of stuff. When you say nerdy interests, I love history in general. I love sort of mythology or storytelling in general, and all these kind of things. So for Teslagrad, there are a few very specific inspirations. We knew from the start that we were going to make a world where we take the old image of Europe and just break that down into 4 nations, right? And we knew exactly which sort of inspirations were going into each one of these 4 nations. So for Teslagrad, it was very simple. One of these nations was to be portrayed. It's the nation's name is Electropia, and the capital of the nation is called Teslagrad, which is where the game takes place. So the inspirations for that particular title were twofold, sort of Nordic and Eastern European mixed together. And if you go over there, have you ever seen sort of an image of a Norwegian sort of ancient Viking church, stave church? Do you know what those are?
If someone was to link to an image of one of those in the chat, I'd appreciate it, just for reference.
So you see one of those in the opening scenes of Teslagrad, actually, and I can try to tell you what they are.
Oh, right, they have the painted glass windows, right?
No, they're way older than that.
Way older than that.
So imagine like the 1200s, and so sort of the Viking kings were trying to, or at least some of the Viking kings were trying to get Christianity into Norway, and by fire and sword it finally sort of happened. And they started to build some of the first Norwegian churches, but they built them in the image of the old faith. So instead of having these sort of standard European stone buildings that were this older style in more southern regions, they created them out of giant timber logs. And of course they had all the faith and all the Christian stuff, of course, but you have to do some things, like for example you have to have dragons on your structure to scare away more evil influences of nature, if not, because they knew that from the old stories and the old religion. So they have all these different sort of things that they draw on. You can also occasionally find sort of Nordic mythological symbols in these churches and those kind of things. So a stave church is typically a wooden church, tarred to last, and in the same sort of sense that an old wooden pirate ship would be tarred. And with these giant sort of, and when I say dragons, I mean Jormungandr, the sort of Scandinavian serpent, the long snake-like beings that the Vikings often draw on things. those sort of stand out a lot. And the reason I take that up is because it's a very Norwegian thing, but you also find them all over Russia.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that is that in the Viking Age, the Vikings were everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually conquered large parts of Russia as well. There was actually a Norwegian king who was, and actually one of the ones wanting to bring Christianity to Norway, was beaten in a battle.
Mm-hmm.
He had to flee into Russia. And with his defeated army, he took over a large portion of Russia at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And from his age, you can sort of still see these wooden stave churches in the middle of the Russian areas. There are a lot of other different influences that are sort of Scandinavian-looking things are distinct, and Russian-looking things are distinct. But in so many instances, you see the cultures sort of mingle,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see that there are some common heritages and some common roots. By the way, the place to go now is to the left, not downwards.
To the left. Okay. Yeah. So that was that sounds like sort of a similar story. That sounds kind of like where Teslagrad came from then.
Not south.
Not south. Left.
Yes, that is where Teslagrad is set.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a lot of things for that. There's, for example, a rune language that we built for the occasion.
Mm-hmm.
So I already know sort of the Norwegian old rune language. It's called Futhark,
Mm-hmm.
named after the first few couple of alphabetic sounds in their alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
Futh. You can figure this out, I'm sure. It has to do with the shovel. So we created a similar language because Futhark was inspired by sort of Latin writing, but like ink and quill was pretty rare at the time, so they didn't really write; they engraved.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with engraving is that you can't really do lines against the wood.
Mm-hmm.
So every sort of line in the language had to be cut downwards in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you can't have a straight H with a bar in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible. You have to make that a perpendicular line, sort of downwards. You can have sloping downwards or straight downwards. Those are the two options that you have for making letters, and all the letters in the rune alphabet adhere to that rule.
Yeah. Roman Lux wants to know, can you solve puzzles with all the character, or does each puzzle require a certain hero? I think it's the latter, right? Like, the point is to trade characters around?
Yes, sort of. In this part of the game, you have to use particular characters, and that has a lot to do with us trying to teach you the powers of the different characters. But later on, some puzzles have to be solved by particular characters, but several puzzles have multiple solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to design 2 solutions at least to every puzzle, but having the options being an obvious one, and a fast one.
Yeah. Real quick, I'm going to follow up back on the history question. So when you're making like a fictional version of Europe, which is like, that's pretty,
Yes.
It's really cool how you guys get to go in depth and draw on local history, but does that create, I mean, Europe is still a country where old conflicts are very personal to people, and even though you're fictionalizing them and sort of making heroes and villains out of these different groups, does that mean you've had to talk to any players who said, hey, I'm from this country that you were inspired from, and I don't know if I agree that we were the bad guys here?
Oh, but that is assuming that you're going to have a story where an entire ethnic group is bad guys.
True.
So instead...
Oh, go for it.
For example, here in this particular game, it's a bit hard to figure out who the villain is for the most part, but I can tell you that the villain also has the same ethnicity and a lot of the same sort of background as one of the main characters.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really say that it's an ethnic group that we, or a people, or a nation that we point out and say the bad guys. We say this individual is not great.
Oh, that's
I
cool.
mean. Also, the main bad guy in Teslagrad is also from the same nationality as the main hero in Teslagrad.
Right.
And the sort of history works a bit like that as well. I mean, especially I guess in European conflicts, in modern history, you might have a pretty clear, occasionally view on who the bad guys might have been. But you will definitely find that you find sort of heroes and villains in each faction, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, there's no war where one faction only had sort of bad guys working for them. A nation doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm. say for Teslagrad, you said that you broke down Europe into like these 4 fictional places, and does that mirror the 4 fictional characters in this game? Then
Yes.
Are they okay? So
one of the reasons.
telling the story of those nations through these characters then?
So one of the reasons we wanted to do this game was because after doing Teslagrad, we wanted to sort of showcase all the nations at once. We hinted at the other nations in Teslagrad, especially for the people who paid attention to details in that game. But getting into more specific stuff, we could then show the difference between them. Also, they have attitudes here that are very reminiscent of at least parts of their own nation. These characters. We wanted to show both the differences in personality and the differences in technology of the nations, because I can very quickly go through the inspirations for the nations. Teslagrad I explained a little bit. In addition to those national inspirations, we of course we based the nation around the science of electricity and magnetism as sort of its driving force. And this is a nation that's also very much into secrecy. So although these powers are used for some common uses like street lamps and electricity that other nations don't have, a lot of the secrets of mysteries of magnetism are kept as mysteries and secrets. And it's almost like people who understand that are basically wizards, or viewed as such by the general population. And are mysterious and maybe a bit scary to them. While other nations have technologies that are much more commonly used. For example, this character is from a very industrialized, motorized place, which we were inspired by, like old Prussia and Germany and sort of Central Europe for that. And most of their technologies are known by every part of the population interacts with some part of their technologies. You'll figure that one out, I'm sure.
I think I made a mistake by jumping down here, and I'm trying to figure out how to get back up.
Try something.
That'll do.
Nice. So it's both sort of the sense of the technology that the nation has. There is no other properly industrialized nation than the nation he comes from. Sort of steam and the power of industry and mass production is their ability, but they don't have electricity, for example.
Yeah.
And we sort of imagine how the society would evolve around that.
Yeah.
For their nation, we have never made a game in their nation yet, but we love to make sort of to write down a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily feel we need to tell people.
Yeah.
But that we know our world better, and that we don't make inconsistencies with things we want to do later because we want to tell more stories in this world.
That's cool.
So, for example, to get air and energy around, this sort of their nation is built on coal, which is sort of mentioned occasionally in this game, and they're running out. And they're trying to look for new sources, which was one of the reasons why they had this little moon expedition going at the start of this game, which Knaus was a part of. And what they do in the central city is that they have a big furnace at the center with a giant sort of master gear that is driven by pistons, right? That's just steam powered. And you know, like how a car drives energy from the back to the front or the front to the back, depending on where the engine is. With it's called an axle in Norwegian. I don't know what the American name for sort of a drive wheel. I don't know.
Drive shaft, I think.
Drive shaft, perhaps. A rod that rotates and drives sort of mechanical energy between places. You imagine this is just a metal rod that rotates, right? It has a gear on each end. You can sort of transmit mechanical energy. So imagine a system like that right under the streets, where the mechanical energy from the master gear is sort of distributed throughout the city, where you have an outlet in your house that is just a rotating gear, but you can put any technology that can work on mechanical energy onto it. So you can, for example, have a washing machine, because that really only needs mechanical energy, but you can't have an oven. Okay. At least not an electrical oven.
What would your advice be for other developers who want to make games, you know, like this, where they can draw, like maybe they have they have an interest in history, they want to make a fantasy kind of game, but like you said, like you don't want to just make any one of these nations is inherently evil because that doesn't line up with the bulk of European history. So what's your advice to someone else who's thinking of making a game like that?
I see you hit a little problem there. One thing is, I feel that making a nation evil doesn't generally line up very well with humanity at all, because that doesn't usually occur. There might be events that sort of drive people a little bit nuts in a period, but it is temporary insanity. I mean, like the local politics might go bad for a little while, but people usually recover. I feel, by the way, I should help you out a little bit. If you go north again, pick up one of the plants and land on the western platform instead of on the southern one, you will get to progress a bit faster.
Oh, thank you.
So imagine sort of the basics of the world you want to create. Ooh, are you having trouble with the? Oh my! You encountered a bug earlier on, which has kept you levitating a little bit over your standing position.
Sweet.
Which is sort of caused a cascade of other things to happen. But anyway, imagine sort of a world under basic ground rules, right? But then sort of imagine people living in that world, which helps a lot. It both has to do with sort of a nation not being evil, but also sort of imagine how people would be and would work with these fantastic things that you have imagined. In the sense that they are real, right? That are supposed to be real human beings. Gods, you're having a lot of trouble with that single one. Can you try falling in the water for me?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and die.
No, you'd probably just have taken a point of damage and it would fix it itself. But,
yeah.
Now it's fixed.
Sorry.
It was giving me a heart attack. Not your.
We have occasionally broken games for developers here on the stream, and we don't mean to, but.
Oh yeah. And sort of build it up over time. I find actually that, like, having this world around for 2 games and now working with it for a 3rd one, it gives a richness to it because we get to add to it each time. It's also very cool to work with multiple people and to have different people have suggestions for the game and for the world, and sort of note down the best of these over time and sort of edit it, and nothing really truly becomes canon before you actually use it in a game. And that's a bit important as well, so that you can sort of get the best of everything. But I guess you need one person to sort of guard the stories as well, to sort of be an auditor for everything and make sure that everything makes sense and is to a certain vision after all. But don't let that person imagine that he's the only person that ever has a good idea. It's just a matter of at least having someone see to that there is a bit of tonal coherency, I guess.
Yeah. We can change gears, although I guess I'm curious. Roman Looks wants to know, how do you guys keep track of this information internally? Do you use a wiki or another tool?
So we do write a lot of stuff down, and we do make a few design documents occasionally, but a lot of it is just something that we keep verbally around, especially the stuff that we have never used before. But we have these sort of things we suggest to each other and stories we tell to each other on occasion. For example, I recently figured out the namings for the currencies in the 4 different nations, because we needed to figure out one, and I sort of thought, but of course every nation has to have that, and it has to have a reason for it. And then so I wrote that down and I kept it around, and now it is available for later if we need it. But we don't use a specific wiki. We gather all the information that's relevant for a particular game into that game's design document. But other than that, I guess it's a lot of stuff that I have to remember and that other people have to remember, although if you work in a specific game, then there will be a source for that.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of an interesting thing for company culture then, because then, like, oh my god, just watching someone
it got eaten.
Yeah. All right, I can go through these holes.
Yes, you can.
Where's this hole lead? Just leads right there. I guess I guess that makes for an interesting thing. So when you hire new people, you sort of have to retell them the story of the game, right?
Yes, and that's actually pretty useful as well. I guess when a company gets bigger, we have to establish wikis and make those kind of things. But you know, it's very uninspiring to actually go and read a wiki, especially all the way through. So in a sense, it's a very good mix of or a very good experience to have to explain the world to someone. There's also the thing that if parts of the world seem a bit stupid or silly when you explain them, that might be a reason to look a little bit into that.
You find that you get like that organic kind of evolution when you tell it to, and you come up with like new ideas as you're re-explaining it and everything.
Yes, definitely. And people also get their own ideas when you explain it like that, when you don't read it as a set in stone text. So yeah, the world gets to evolve. Of course, anything that has become nailed down because it's been in the game doesn't get to change anymore. But that is also fine, and it's also something more to build on. And this also has a lot to do with how we tell our stories in the games. Because in Tastragad, again, we did everything silent, and here we are trying to be very sparse with words as well. So we have sort of a narrative that lies in 3 layers. The top layer is everything that is going on right now. Everyone sort of understands the immediate thing the character does, right? And what they're themselves doing. So, the second layer is everything that is, at least if you talk to everybody, explicitly said. If you read all the dialogue, talk to all the people, you will find out a lot more about the world and what's going on and people's motivations. But we don't expect everyone to do this. We want there to be a story for the people who just press X on every piece of dialogue ever. We still want them to be able to basically tell what's going on. Try to go north. Not north.
Nope. Oh, shit. This is gonna...
It'll really grow pretty quickly.
Yes.
So try to go north with that. I guess sort of puzzle solving and exploring and talking can be a bit... the third layer is everything that we don't explicitly say, but that is nonetheless sort of factual and findable. For example, if there is a statue of someone, or if there's a mural, or if you can see that something has happened in somewhere before, then that is part of our story, and you can actually figure out a lot of stuff, and people have. Because we might not have a wiki about everything, but there is a fan wiki about Teslagrad, which has grown quite big. And it contains lots of stuff that people have figured out. Also, for example, I mentioned that we have a runed alphabet for Teslagrad, or rather, we have a runed alphabet for Electropia. We use it in this game as well. And tiny details for objects that are from Electropia. That is text that people have decoded, and it's a separate little language, and they keep track of everything that's said. There's also sort of other moments when they find, wait a minute, I think those 2 characters are related, or I think that something happened there in the past, or anything like that. They keep tracking, and all that is the third layer of stuff that is real, that is sort of inserted in the game in a way that you can find out about it, but that is not explicitly said in any way, sense, or form.
Yeah.
And a lot of that stuff is actually only at this point understandable if you play both games, because there are references to this game in Teslagrad. Right. Because we already knew we were going to make it when we were finishing up Teslagrad. And I mentioned that we have several games on the block at the same time, and we picked the most popular one. So we get to hint to more than one of them as well. So there are a hint to several other events in Teslagrad and in this title as well. Also, of course, hints back to Teslagrad, which might explain some of the points that people haven't quite figured out there yet.
Oops. Got it. We have 10 minutes left, so I'll go ahead and quickly invite anyone in chat to share any more questions they have. My next question then, you said you have a lot of games on the block at once. I was curious if, from a technical standpoint, if there was any major disadvantage to changing game genres between you 2 games, because it meant you couldn't reuse as much stuff?
Of course it is. I mean, you have to. Although we used Unity, right? We use Unity for both games, and if you can imagine that if Teslagrad and Wild to the West burn on the same engine, that you have to make a lot of your own stuff because they don't exactly exhibit the same traits. So you have to build up all the mechanics for that. So sure, this is why it takes us 3 years to make a game, right? But on the other hand, there's always a little issue with making a direct sequel that the mechanics will get a bit tired. You get the same story or parts of the same story and also the same sort of mechanical world. So the only way you can argue for making a sequel is then usually traditionally it's been to up the graphical fidelity of the title. But in this day and age, that is sort of falling a bit to the side, and there was not very many places to go with the graphical design. So Tastrograd is, in my opinion, already as far in its own direction as it could go. You couldn't easily go very much further with that sort of graphical style. And then I guess you could have added a lot of more levels and features, but in the end, it often just feels like it should have been DLC.
So do you kind of feel that indie developers benefit from not just trying, when they make, like, sequels aren't as good for indie developers because you can't push, I should say direct sequels. Like, it's hard for indie developers to do direct sequels because it's hard to push the technology of a given game?
Well, actually, I find very many indie developers don't do sequels at all, and I wish that many of them would have kept sort of their world and the things that people love around a little bit more. And character designs and all those kind of things can actually gain a lot from staying with you. You don't have to reinvent everything every time. But I guess that also depends a little bit upon whether you wrote the world as a place where more than one story could take place in the first place, because many worlds are just created for the story and for the character. I mean, like the Mushroom Kingdom doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense outside of a Mario game. And it can be hard to make something new in the same incarnation of that world. But yeah, I guess that some titles can benefit a lot from having a sequel, especially if there is something that you see that you could clearly improve upon. If you say that, yeah, our last title was great, but people liked it despite some major flaw, for example, then you could say, but we can make a sequel that is as great and doesn't have that major flaw. And I've seen several examples of that as well. And why not? I mean, as long as you feel that a sequel adds something that the original couldn't, there's a good reason to do one. But if you don't feel that, I don't think you have to do a sequel, and probably shouldn't.
Roman Looks says that the Dark Train from Paparash, which is a game I have not heard of, did something similar.
I don't know that title either, so it's a bit hard to comment on. What did it do?
Roman Lux, if you want to tell us how it did that, we would love to hear that. Let's see. I like this new ice ability I just picked up.
Oh yes, the skates. Sort of a lot of titles like this. You sort of at some point you would want to cross most obvious obstacles, and that means that a lot of games like this introduce a swimming mechanic, and almost universally it's terrible because it's slow and tedious, and you hate water after a short while. So I really had to stop and think for a while there. But there is a fun way to cross water. It's precisely one, and in my opinion, it's skating. Because it gives good momentum, and it's a very special, different way of moving. You have a sort of smooth, sort of one skate, two skate. So you can press the skates again when you don't need to go to the end of the movement, but you have to follow them for a while before you can turn, right? So this is putting one leg down, putting one leg down, putting one leg down, putting one leg down. This cross movement of skates, which meant that instead of water being, for this character, a place where movement is sort of slowed down, it instead becomes an area where movement is actually sped up. So instead of dreading that you have to cross the water every time, you actually see it as sort of an opportunity for fast travel.
Cool. Roman Looks just says they established lore within one game and made a different game with another genre that's another genre set in the same world.
Cool.
Like I said, we're close to wrapping up. Alyssa, do you have any last questions for Peter that we should make sure we get today?
I was going to ask you about your experience showing your game at conventions, because you've been to GDC, I know. How many conventions have you shown this game at?
So 2 years for GDC, and also we did part of the Eurogame Expo this year, and we did last year what's it called? Gamescom, of course. Okay. And Nintendo invited us for Gamescom, and they invited us for PAX as well, which we also did. So we were part of the Nintendo stand at both those places with the Wii U version running, which it doesn't do now for reasons, but it'll be out soon-ish. Of course, it wasn't a complete version of the game, but it was pretty well close to finished, as few technical special difficulties that we have to fix that we didn't quite have to fix for the convention. That's the reason that it's delayed.
We were talking. We were talking before. I'm just going to squeeze this question in before we go. We were about how the Wii U version of Teslagrad was actually one of the best-selling versions, but obviously that console didn't do very well. How do you sort of feel? Like, how does it feel to be a developer who, like, one of your best performing game sales is on a console that just isn't doing as strongly?
Well, of course, it didn't. There's several reasons why that worked. I mean, there was not many titles released for it comparatively. Indie titles actually got a good visibility on the platform. I mean, whenever we released in a new area, right? Nintendo has this sort of double split. Like 2 games are the entire top of the store. And we were one of those 2 games for 2 weeks in each area where we released. That wouldn't have been the case on any other platform. And that helped a lot. I mean, we got as much visibility when we released as Hyrule Warriors, which actually we shared the place with twice. And that meant an enormous amount, so sort of the support from Nintendo itself. It's also the fact, of course, that the title has a lot of its audience on that particular platform, because if you are looking for games like that, you're probably a fan of Nintendo and those kind of titles. So if you have gotten a Nintendo device, you are more likely to enjoy at least the aesthetic that this game is going for. So, and the same was with Teslagrad, sort of having a cartoony, although Teslagrad is a bit darker aesthetic, still a cartoony aesthetic and those kind of heroes and those kind of that kind of atmosphere. There's much more of an audience for it there. So of course, visibility and an audience actually to sort of it is more important to be visible than to have like the biggest target audience be on the platform, because I mean the amount of people, for example, that are on Steam is enormous, right? But there's nobody really complaining about that. They're complaining about the fact that you can't get visibility on Steam. It's almost impossible. And it's not, for example, you're not in all probability an indie game ever going to expand the entire audience for a game. You're never going to reach user saturation. You're never going to reach the point where everyone who would have liked your indie game if they played it already have it. It's just a question of reaching them. So the fact that there are fewer people on the consoles and there's fewer potential customers doesn't necessarily matter if you can actually reach the customers that are there, and that they don't have too many other equivalent options that they could go for. That said, I mean, this title is even more sort of if you were looking for an indie puzzle platformer, you could probably have had a lot of alternatives other than Teslagrad. Even Metroidvanias there are more of. But World to the West, this kind of experience is something that is a bit more uncommon. So we hope that once we do reach our audience, that people do pick this game up, because again, it doesn't have too many direct competitors. So we hope, hope that's something that happens.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, we wish you good luck, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us today. I guess it's time for us to wrap up. The game, for those of you who joined in the later half or just haven't looked up or down on your screen yet, is World to the West. Comes from developer Rain Games. It's available on PS4, Xbox One, and Steam. Thank you so much for joining us. We would appreciate it if you have enjoyed talking with Peter today. We'd love it if you were to follow the Gamasutra Twitch channel, because we'd love to introduce you to many great developers that we bring on here. We've got some good stuff set up for next week. We're hopefully going to be able to have a panel on game accessibility, so you should come by for that. Alyssa, anything you want to hype in particular?
No. I think you about covered it.
Yeah, all right. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Peter, should they follow Rain Games anywhere on Twitter, for instance?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So Twitter is a place where we're active. If you're also interested in all kind of other nerdy goodness, you can recommend following Oliver Rudi, who has been in the comments right now as well. His stream's always really active about both the stuff we do, but also like a lot of like nerdy subjects of all kinds, and a lot of old artwork or or special things, or even bad movies and those kind of things.
Yeah.
So follow us there, and or of course there is always Facebook, and we do update that, but it's a bit more rarely.
Gotcha.
And of course, check out the game. We also love to hear what you think about it. So if you do ever play Will to the West, write us a tweet and tell us what you thought about it. The good or the bad or anything, really. Just your experience.
Yeah. With that, we will be signing off. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.